What's up, YouTube? RockChalk14 back again with my weekly blog, I guess, for Fanduel.com. Today we're going to look at my thoughts on Week 5 in the NFL, kind of players that I'm going to be targeting on Fanduel this week, different kind of things as I was going to put my rosters together this week, things I'm thinking about. First thing, I didn't mention this in the previous video, I never play Thursday games. I did once, and then I realized that you lock into guys on Sundays that they could get hurt in practice on Thursday or Friday, or anything could happen, and then you're stuck with them. So I never play Thursday games. That's if you're if you really like a guy that's playing on Thursday night, you can. This week it's Buffalo and Cleveland. The only player I would ever pick out of that would be the tight end. Excuse me, Cameron Jordan. Excuse me. So I'm looking at this week. When I'm going to build my roster, I keep in mind a couple of principles that I said before. You basically can afford 3 stud players, and you need to pick 3 stud players that you are absolutely sure have the juiciest matchups, or that you feel the most confident about going into, that they are going to produce. You also have to look at how much they cost and those kinds of things. So the number one fantasy matchup this week, it has to be, I always start with passing because you get PPR points, and there tends to be more. Looking at receivers and quarterbacks seem to me often to outscore the running backs, unless the running back is sort of a PPR back. So the juiciest matchup this week is Denver taking on Dallas. Dallas, up to this point, is surrendering, let me look at my notes here, surrendering 316 yards a week on average. They've let up 6 passing touchdowns up to this point, which is a little over 2 a game, but of course we know Manning does his thing. Things you got to think about. So, I mean, in my mind, you got to have one player from that game if you want to be competitive this week, namely on the Broncos side of the ball. You look at the cost of guys. If you decide you're going to go, if you look at really, there's 3 guys. You got to pick one of the 3, in my mind. You either go Peyton Manning, Demaryius Thomas, or Wes Welker. Eric Decker doesn't catch enough balls. Julius Thomas hasn't been as involved as he was the first couple weeks. And so I'm looking for consistency, and those 3 have been modeled to consistency. I'm probably passing on Manning this week. He costs $10,400, which is over 1/6 of your total cost in your team. So if you take him this week, I mean, you better hope that he puts up career numbers unless you happen to know some gem in the rough. I'd be happy with either Demaryius Thomas or Wes Welker. Demaryius Thomas is going for 8.7 right now, and Wes Welker 7.8. I think you might be able to get a little more value out of Welker in there. In my team, I'll probably end up going Thomas just because of the consistency of the number of targets he's getting, the stats he's putting up, and so on and so forth, at 8.7, so that's one of my stud players. After that, another really good matchup, and kind of my must-have this week, or a good matchup anyways. The Detroit Lions are playing the Green Bay Packers this week. If you looked at just general stats, you might have missed this, but Green Bay, despite being a pretty solid team, they've let up 311 yards on average in the air this week, or this year. I mean, they had a bye last week, so the numbers are a little skewed, but they've let up an average of 311 yards, and they've 8 touchdowns to other teams, passing touchdowns. And so with that in mind, I'm probably looking to target Kelvin Johnson and just bite the bullet. Which also makes me think maybe I'm into Matt Stafford. Now, if you do Matt Stafford, you're then going to have to, he costs a little more. He's 8.5, which is a better value than Manning, for example. But at 8.5, that takes up the spot of, say, like Demaryius Thomas is 8.7. So you start looking at that kind of thing. Kelvin Johnson's going for $9,000. He's the top priced wide receiver. I'm probably going to end up taking him. When it comes to that, unless I find a different combination that I really like. Green Bay's defense is letting up a lot to opposing receivers, and Kelvin Johnson's a stud. He's going to get his every week. Then looking at other stuff with the passing, if I'm looking at a tight end, for example, and this goes back, I'm going to treat Jimmy Graham as essentially a stud wide receiver because he costs roughly the same. He costs $8,400. Which is only $300 less than Demaryius Thomas, who is, I think, the second highest priced wide receiver. So you got to decide if you're going Jimmy Graham. I mean, he is just proven himself. It doesn't matter; he's going to be a stud. But if you do, what that ends up being is that your bottom 2 receivers are going to be kind of mid to low tier reaches, where you're going to really hope for overproducing for that week. If you don't take Jimmy Graham, my advice is to go low to get a tight end that costs less than 6K, because honestly, guys like Tony Gonzalez, and Jason Witten, all those other Vernon Davis, there's something, they have great weeks and then they have nothing, and so you're looking for consistency when it comes to that. And so if you're going to play, for $7,000, you'd rather have, instead of paying $7,000 for Tony Gonzalez, I don't know what his exact cost was, I'm not targeting him this week, 7 plus K or whatever, you'd rather invest that in a wide receiver, a better wide receiver, I should say. So kind of that's what I'm looking at. I'm probably going to target one of those Denver receivers and probably Kelvin Johnson. As far as quarterbacks go, if I don't decide to go Stafford, I'm probably not going to go Manning. He's probably too expensive. I mean, you can go that way if you really want, but if I don't go Stafford, I'm probably going to look for some value lower on. Looking at value, I don't like him, but Sam Bradford's playing the Jacksonville Jaguars. That's always something to be said, how terrible they are. He's costing 68 right now. I guess, and Terrell Pryor, he's supposed to come back this week. He has a great matchup against San Diego, who is allowing 8 touchdowns and 311. He's allowed 8 touchdowns and 311 yards a game up to this point. So he's got a great matchup as well. The thing about him is he's coming off a concussion, and so you have to decide whether or not you think that's the way to go. For the passing game, I'm probably going to end up taking either Demaryius Thomas and Welker and probably Kelvin Johnson. If I go quarterback higher end, I'm going to take Stafford. If not, I'll probably take someone like either Bradford or Pryor, depending on how I'm feeling. As far as rushing goes, when you go to pick up your 2 top running backs, I always look to get one top-end player, unless my quarterback is my top-end player, is my third top-end player, and I get one value back. Try to find somebody at the lower cost that's going to get carries and that's going to get work. As far as the top rushers this week, Adrian Peterson's off, so I'm either going to go with my top player. I'm going to take either Jamal Charles or Shady McCoy. Charles is costing 9,300 right now. Shady's going to 88. Charles just been a stud all year. There's nothing real special about the Tennessee matchup. It's just his consistent work week in, week out. LaShawn McCoy is taking on, let's see, he is taking on the New York Giants, who are 28th in the NFL in rushing defense. They are letting up an average of 122.5 yards to opposing running backs each week, and they've let up 4 touchdowns, so 1 a game. So they're averaging 122.5 and 1 touchdown per game. So, and that offense really seems to revolve around him. The thing about him is he did leave with a partial injury for a little bit last week, which kind of posed some guys who had picked him, but I don't know. So I'm probably going to go with one of those 2 guys. I love Jamal Charles. I live in the Kansas City area, by the way, so that's another kind of reason. But he has been producing. Adrian Peterson would be somebody you might target as well, but he's on a bye. When you're going for your value player, if you're a gambler, if you really want to gamble, you want to go for top, a guy who could get you 20 yards or who could go for a monster game. It's going to go one way or the other. It's not going to be an in-between, and that's Maurice Jones-Drew this week. I have him in my other standard fantasy leagues, and he's been really disappointing. But this is it. If there is a week that's going to happen, it's going to be this week. He is playing against the St. Louis defense, which has allowed an average of 133.5 yards to opposing running backs and 5 touchdowns total, so 1.25. So this is the week. If he's going to bust out, it's going to be this week. If not, it's not it. So if you're a gambler, you might look at him. He's going for 6,700 right now, which is pretty cheap. Lamar Miller is going for 6,500. I like him as well as a possible value play. Looking at a guy who scored a couple touchdowns. He's kind of a touchdown. He's going to be part of a passing game. Danny Woodhead, 6,100. I mean, he produced the last couple weeks. I don't know that I'm picking him. I don't know if I want Danny Wood in my lineup. A guy I'm probably targeting for my value guy. It's a little risky, but it's Eddie Lacy. He's cost $6,000. He's coming back off of a concussion. He had a week off to prepare. They're playing the Detroit Lions, which have I don't have specific stats on them, but it's a pretty good matchup for him. So he only costs $6,000. It's the kind of guy where at least he's probably going to be the starting running back. At least they've announced him as the starting running back. If not, I'm probably going to target like maybe a Lamar Miller. And then when you go to kickers and defense, this is kind of one of my general philosophies. I always the bottom price you can pay for a starting kicker or a starting defense is $5,000. I always do a $5,000 defense and kicker unless I have extra cash. Like I'm happy with my third receiver, and I don't really like the guys that are cost more, and so I have a couple $100 left over. At which point I'll make an evaluated decision. So I'm probably not going to talk too much about kickers and defense on here. Kickers are such a crapshoot. There's really no way to know. I mean, obviously, a guy like Matt Prater is going to score a lot because they're going to score so many touchdowns and get a lot of extra points. Gostowski continually ranks high, but I will probably never own those guys week to week because I'll probably never invest that much money. I'll never invest $5,700 or plus on a kicker. Same thing with defenses. You really want to look at the bottom defenses and the ones that have decent matchups. You get 10 points if they shut them out, which rarely happens, and so defensive touchdowns are so there's no way to know when they're going to happen. You just look for guys, defenses that get sacks and whatnot. So I'm probably going to go with 5K defense, 5K kicker. To recap, you got to have one of those Broncos, one of those three Broncos I talked about, Manning, Thomas, or Welker. You kind of pick your poison there. If you go Manning, it might restrict you from getting some of the other guys later on, the quality of the rest of your team. Detroit, I really like them. Their passing attack against Green Bay. Stafford at 8,500, Calvin Johnson at $9,000. I wouldn't go to Broyles or anybody else on that defense. Reggie Bush, I'm afraid coming off that injury that he's going to share too much time with Drake Bell, so I don't really like either of them, to be honest. Again, on tight ends, you either choose that you're going Graham or I say you go less than 6K, and then you look for value. Running backs, I'm probably going to have either Jamal Charles or LaShawn McCoy. Otherwise, I will have two value running backs. I don't really like any of the other top running backs enough to invest in them. So, if you have questions, guys, again, this is just my opinion. I've had some success, but I'm by no means an expert. I just have enjoyed doing this. So, if you have any questions, feel free to comment and in the video below. Hope this helps you out, and hope you have a great fantasy week. All right, peace.